Welcome to my podcast, Scientist Free from Religion. This podcast has as proposal, as main idea to talk about a scientific topic, but also talk about religion. Different from the common assumption in which science and religion should be separated, here on this podcast we recognize formally that science and religion are not disconnected. Sadly, religion can be a very big threat to science. So on this podcast, the proposal is to talk about it freely, so without fear, without the illusion that they are separate topics. So we are going to cover a possible topic. Most of them will be focused on the connection between religion and science, especially to defend science. That's our goal. Our goal here is to defend science from religion and to help to make science, to spread scientific thinking, especially to defend it against religion.
Okay, let's get into this idea. What if the basic thing about belief isn't really about finding God, but about, starting without one? Like, imagine someone telling you deep down, under all the culture, the upbringing, you were just born without gods.
Yeah.
That feels, well, pretty radical.
Right.
Kind of provocative.
It definitely can be, yeah. It challenges a lot of assumptions. But the perspective we're digging into today, based on the sources you shared, including that piece by Dr. Pyers, it's not just like a philosophical riff.
Right.
It's actually grounded in science, cognitive science, psychology, anthropology.
Right.
They all feed into this.
Exactly. So that's our mission for this deep dive, really, to unpack the science behind this claim, this idea that maybe being non-religious, or I guess unreligious, is the human default.
How our basic mental setup works and how culture kind of installs itself onto that.
Yeah, how culture interacts with those maybe innate tendencies to shape what we end up believing.
Precisely. We're looking at how minds work, how environment plays a role, and how that cultural software gets loaded.
So let's start with that really core idea from the sources. Just sit with it for a second. You weren't born Christian. You weren't born Muslim or Hindu. You were just born without gods. It kind of messes with your head because, well, we grow up surrounded by it all.
It does, and the material really highlights that. It's like that Richard Dawkins line, you know?
One about kids.
Exactly. There's no Christian child, only a child with Christian parents. And the point isn't just being clever with words.
It's saying religion is learned.
Yeah.
Not something you're just born with.
Precisely. It's transmitted culturally. It's not in your DNA, not an automatic part of the mind's initial setup.
And you're saying this isn't just philosophy. The science actually points this way.
That's the argument, yeah. Research on babies, on early childhood cognition, it suggests that while kids' minds are definitely primed in certain ways, they don't pop out understanding karma or original sin. Those concepts aren't preloaded.
Okay, yeah, that makes intuitive sense. So if they're not born with religious ideas, what do they have? What are the basic mental tools?
Well, they have these foundational cognitive systems that are, frankly, amazing for survival.
Yeah.
Things like hyperactive agency detection.
HADD.
Yeah, HADD for short. And pattern recognition, a developing theory of mind.
Theory of mind.
Yeah.
That's like figuring out other people have their own thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. Understanding that others have intentions, beliefs, desires different from your own. These are really basic, universal building blocks.
So how do those tools, like HADD, connect to believing or not believing in gods?
Well, they have. Let's call them side effects. Or maybe it's just that they're so fundamental they color how we interpret anything ambiguous. Think about those examples in the source.
Like the rustling leaves.
Right. Is it just wind? Or is it a predator? Your brain is wired to jump to that second possibility almost instantly.
Or a weird shadow in the dark isn't just a shadow.
Could be a monster. Or thunder isn't just atmospheric discharge. Maybe the gods are angry.
Because assuming there's an agent, a who, behind it, is safer evolutionarily than ignoring a potential threat.
Totally. It's the better safe than sorry principle cranked way up. A false positive, seeing an agent or threat where there isn't one, is way less dangerous, evolutionarily speaking, than a false negative missing a real danger.
Ah, okay. So that bias towards seeing intention, seeing agency, it was actually good for survival.
And highly adaptive, yes. Especially when things were uncertain.
So our brains are basically agent-detecting machines, looking for the who or what behind events.
That's a good way to put it. And this tendency, this illusory agency detection, it gets really baked in, what we might call superstition. You can see it as that cognitive system sort of misfiring, attributing something to an agent when, maybe it was just chance or physics. The bogeyman under the bed is a classic childhood example.
Yeah, kids really feel that fear. They believe something's there.
And that mental structure, the idea that unseen agents can affect things, it's powerful.
So is the argument then that adult religious beliefs, God, angels, demons, are maybe built on that same foundation, like a continuation of that childhood pattern?
That's the strong suggestion in the source material, yeah.
The names change, the stories get more complex, but the underlying template, invisible agents watching, judging, intervening, it taps into that same primal wiring.
That's the connection being drawn. It's not seen as just a coincidence. And you can see how deep this agent detecting thing goes, even in people who say they don't believe. The example used is the despacho in Brazil.
Oh, right, the little ritual offerings you sometimes see on street corners.
Exactly. The article mentions how people react if they see someone, say, kicking one or even eating the food left there.
People freak out.
Some do. Amusement, sure, but also real discomfort, even panic or disgust. And this can happen even with people who tell you flat out, oh, I don't believe in those spirits.
Wow. So it shows there's this deeper sort of implicit, culturally embedded feeling about invisible agents, even if your rational mind denies it.
Precisely. It shows how these assumptions about unseen forces can be deeply ingrained by culture, operating below conscious belief. And the source makes this really interesting contrast.
Okay.
We tell kids universally, you need to grow out of believing in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy.
Right.
That's seen as becoming mature, rational.
Yeah, shedding childish things.
But then believing in an invisible, all-seeing father figure who judges your every move and decides your eternal fate, that is often presented as the very definition of maturity, a sign of moral development.
Huh. That raises that question from the source, doesn't it? Is religious belief in some way just a kind of adult version of childhood fears? Socially approved superstition built on that same cognitive bias?
It's definitely a provocative question posed by this perspective. What if it's tapping into the same mechanisms, just with more sophisticated narrative?
Okay, but hang on. I'm sure I've read about developmental psychology, researchers like Bloom or Barrett saying kids are kind of predisposed to religious ideas. How does that fit?
Yeah, that's super important, and the source definitely engages with that research. People like Paul Bloom and Justin Barrett have shown convincingly that kids tend to be, quote, natural-born dualists and intuitive theists.
Okay, what do those mean in simple terms? Dualists.
Dualists means they intuitively grasp the mind or soul as something separate from the physical body. It feels natural to them.
And intuitive theists.
That means they tend to see purpose and design in the world around them. They lean towards attributing events to some kind of intention, even without specific religious teaching.
So they're sort of ready to think about minds without bodies and purpose behind things.
Exactly. And this is the absolute crucial distinction the source makes. This does not mean children are born religious. It means their minds have these general cognitive tendencies that make the kinds of concepts found in many religions, like spirits, purposeful creation, life after death, relatively easy for them to understand and accept later on.
Okay, so it's like their minds are fertile soil for those types of ideas. But the specific seeds, the doctrines, the named gods, have to be planted by culture.
That's a perfect analogy. The source uses the idea that religions, specific systems like Christianity or Islam or Hinduism, kind of hijack or build upon these underlying tendencies. They map their complex doctrines onto these basic mental scaffolds.
So the child's mind is ready for the idea of an invisible agent.
And then culture gives it a name. God, Allah, spirits, ancestors, whatever it might be.
Okay, I think I'm getting that distinction now. It's not innate belief in God, but an innate readiness for agent-based thinking in non-physical minds, which culture then shapes into specific religions.
You got it. Prepared to look for agents, ready for culture to provide the details, the stories, the rules.
And the source material suggests different religions interact with these tendencies differently. It contrasts Christianity and Buddhism on this point.
It does, and it's a really interesting comparison. Christianity, in this view, is often presented as a system that really maximizes agency detection. Well, events are frequently framed through the lens of who is acting. God's will, Satan's temptation, divine punishment, angelic intervention. Everything has an author, a purpose driven by an agent. The Book of Job is given as a prime example.
Right. His suffering isn't random, it's a cosmic bet.
Exactly. It's a negotiation between God and Satan. Even things like illness or weather aren't just natural processes. They can be interpreted as messages, tests, or judgments from a conscious being.
So a big focus on finding the personal intentional cause.
Often, yes, in that framework. Now, contrast that with core Buddhist philosophy. While Buddhism, in practice, across different cultures, might absolutely involve deities,
Sure.
the fundamental philosophy, especially in early texts, tends to resist explaining things primarily through divine agency. Karma, for instance.
It's not a cosmic judge.
No, it's presented more as a natural law, like physics. Cause and effect based on your actions and intentions. Suffering arises from attachment and ignorance, not because a god is angry. Liberation comes from insight, from understanding reality, not from obeying a divine command.
That feels very different. Less who did this and more what's the process here?
Exactly. And this is where that parable comes in handy, the rope and the snake.
Yeah. Tell us that one.
It's a classic from Indian traditions. Someone walks into a dark room, sees a coiled shape, instantly panics snake, and suffers intense fear.
Oh.
Then the next morning, sunlight comes in, and they see clearly. It was just a piece of rope all along.
So the mistaken perception, mistaking the rope for a snake, caused the suffering. Realizing the truth dissolves it.
Precisely. And connecting it back to our cognitive science, that initial panic, that's HADD. It's that better safe than sorry jump to assume a threat.
But Buddhism uses that HADD-like reaction not to build a story about snake gods, but to illustrate how misperception itself causes suffering, and clarity brings relief.
That's the key difference highlighted. Both systems, in a way, are working with the same raw human material, our instincts, our biases, our tendency to see agents. Christianity uses parables like the lost sheep. Buddhism uses parables like the rope and snake. They both draw on fundamental human experiences.
But with very different aims and interpretations, right?
Yeah.
One emphasizes reliance on the agent, the shepherd. The other emphasizes seeing through the illusion, the snake.
Exactly. Different maps built on the same underlying cognitive territory.
Which brings us back squarely to HADD as this evolutionary survival tool. It wasn't about being right. It was about not getting eaten.
Absolutely. The source really stresses this. Evolution favored survival, not accurate perception. The ancestor who heard a noise yelled tiger and ran.
Even if it was just the wind at 99 times out of 100.
Was more likely to pass on their genes than the calm, rational one who waited for confirmation and occasionally became lunch.
So this tendency to see agents, to err on the side of caution, got hardwired in because it worked for survival.
Very much, yeah. Better safe than sorry became biology. And you even see hints of this variation in threat sensitivity across the animal kingdom, like those reactive hummingbirds versus calmer birds mentioned, different evolutionary pressures.
And we humans carry that evolutionary baggage.
We do. If you see us as part of that continuum, the emotional echoes of HADD are still there, maybe influencing personality, anxiety levels, how we approach risk, and potentially, the source suggests, even our metaphysics, how we instinctively frame reality.
And the key point is that religious ideas get layered on top of this mechanism. They don't spring from it automatically.
That's the argument. The ideas are culturally installed onto this pre-existing hardware without that cultural programming.
A person might just not develop specific beliefs in gods, maybe feel wonder, but not assign it to a specific agent.
That's the conclusion this perspective leads to. Indifference to the supernatural might be the default if culture doesn't actively shape belief. Believing God isn't seen as inevitable, but as a cultural product.
Which makes that Dawkins quip about the geographic lottery hit harder.
Yeah.
Isn't it convenient God put you in the one true religion?
It really highlights the point, doesn't it? The source emphasizes how religion maps onto geography just like language dialects. Born in Iran, likely Muslim, India, likely Hindu, Brazil, likely Catholic or evangelical.
Your location, not some universal truth, is the biggest predictor.
Overwhelmingly. And that pattern strongly supports the idea we're born as a sort of blank slate, religiously speaking, and culture does the writing. Religion as software uploaded into a flexible brain.
And the implication is that software can be changed or not installed at all.
Right, which leads to the observation about functional atheism in some societies.
Places like Japan, Scandinavia, parts of China, where formal religion is less prominent.
Exactly. The point made is that these societies function just fine. They demonstrate that large-scale active belief in supernatural agents isn't actually necessary for a society to work, to be cohesive, or for people to live meaningful lives. They live without gods, and nothing collapses.
It's proof of concept, in a way. And this connects to the scientific idea of the null hypothesis.
It connects perfectly. In science, you start by assuming no effect, no entity, until evidence forces you to think otherwise. That's the default, the null hypothesis.
So applying that logic to God,
Disbelief becomes the rational starting point. It's not an active claim needing its own proof. It's withholding belief in an extraordinary claim until sufficient evidence comes along.
The burden of proof isn't on the person not believing in gods.
Exactly. The burden lies squarely with the person making the positive claim, God exists. Until that burden is met, disbelief is presented as the logical default. So wrapping this all up, the core takeaway from this perspective isn't necessarily that atheism is always this conscious, hard-fought rejection. For many people, maybe even globally, it's just the starting point, the state you begin in and might remain in if that optional module of theism isn't installed by culture or experience.
Right. And if that module isn't installed, or if someone, uninstalls it later through questioning or different experiences.
Then you essentially return to the baseline, perceiving a world shaped by natural forces and human actions, not divine ones. Atheism in this light isn't something needing special justification. It's potentially the natural state underneath it all.
Wow. That really does flip the script on how we usually talk about belief. Okay, so for you listening, here's a final thought to chew on from this deep dive. If this built-in tendency to see agents everywhere, this HADD, influences everything, from seeing monsters in the dark to complex theology, what else might it be doing? How many other ropes might you be mistaking for snakes in your everyday life? Misinterpreting situations, people's motives, maybe even your own feelings because of these old evolutionary biases and the cultural stories layered on top. Something to maybe keep in mind as you navigate your world.
And maybe the goal then, for anyone really, isn't just about believing or disbelieving more strongly. Maybe it's about striving to see more clearly, trying to tell the difference between the wind and the predator, the rope and the snake, the shadow and the monster, trying to see things as they are as best we can beyond just our gut reactions and cultural programming.
Hey there, you arrived to the end of this episode. You can always check out my YouTube channel and also keep watching because there are 7 episodes. So you just, if you enjoyed this one, hopefully you are going to enjoy the next one. I always like to remember that you can support my work by buying my books. Even though I still don't have a book about religion, which is the main topic of the podcast, I do have a book about artificial intelligence. And also I have a blog called Scientists Free from Religion on Medium. And there are several blog posts there. And you can enjoy it, you can read it. And you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can share it with your friends. So hopefully I can hear from you and hope you had an amazing time. So hope to see you in the next episode.